Right now, all eyes are on the Middle East. The headlines are a constant stream of carrier groups, proxy militias, and the simmering threat of a wider war with Iran. But what if I told you that you're looking at the wrong map? What if this conflict, the one dominating our screens, is just a distraction? Because behind the scenes, far from the deserts of the Middle East, another global power is playing an entirely different game. China isn't just watching this tense standoff. It's quietly setting a strategic trap, one designed to bleed American resources, test its military, and ultimately clear the way for a new global order. A trap that doesn't even need a full-scale war to work. Today, we're uncovering the hidden story of the US-Iran rivalry and how it could be dragging America not just into a regional conflict, but into a catastrophic confrontation with China down the road. For as long as most of us can remember, the United States and Iran have been locked in a hostile standoff. It's a geopolitical fault line that defines the modern Middle East. The flashpoints are all too familiar. Iran's nuclear program, its network of proxy forces from Yemen to Lebanon, and its repeated threats to the world's most critical energy choke point, the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow waterway is the artery for a huge portion of the world's energy. About 21% of the globe's petroleum liquids and roughly 20% of its liquefied natural gas flow through the strait. Any disruption here sends immediate shockwaves through the global economy. And this is where the story gets complicated, and where China enters the scene not as a bystander, but as a central player with a very contradictory set of interests. On one hand, Beijing should be worried. China is the world's biggest importer of crude oil, and its economy depends on that energy flowing without interruption. By some estimates, nearly half of China's oil imports have to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Any conflict that closes it would directly threaten China's economic and national security. So you'd think Beijing would be on Washington's side, pushing for stability and safe passage. But here's the paradox. China is also Iran's most important economic partner. It is the single largest buyer of Iranian oil, purchasing an estimated 80 to 90% of Iran's total exports, often at a steep discount. This trade is a vital financial lifeline for Tehran, softening the blow of Western sanctions and allowing the regime to keep funding its military and regional ambitions. This creates a delicate and dangerous balancing act for Beijing. China needs regional stability for its energy security, but it also benefits from an empowered Iran that challenges American influence. This isn't a contradiction in its strategy, it is the strategy. Beijing's goal isn't to pick a side. It's to play both sides, with the United States stuck right in the middle. The constant tension in the Gulf serves a purpose. It keeps America preoccupied, its attention diverted, and its resources tied down in a secondary theater, while China focuses on its primary goals somewhere else entirely. While Washington is trapped in a cycle of provocations and responses in the Persian Gulf, China is running a multi-layered strategy that operates just below the surface. This isn't about sending troops to fight alongside Iran. It's a much more subtle, and you could argue, much more effective approach, built on three pillars: economic entanglement, quiet military support, and a massive intelligence-gathering operation. First, let's follow the money. China's support for Iran isn't just about buying oil. The two countries signed a 25-year strategic partnership back in 2021, a huge deal that promised up to $400 billion in Chinese investments for a steady supply of oil. Now, how much of that money has actually shown up is debated, but the message is crystal clear. China is committed to Iran's economic survival. This is no act of charity. By propping up the Iranian economy, Beijing makes sure Tehran stays a persistent thorn in America's side. A financially stable Iran can fund its proxies, advance its nuclear program, and build up its military presence in the Gulf. Every one of those activities forces the United States to spend immense political, financial, and military capital that it can't then use to compete with China in the Indo-Pacific. China is essentially outsourcing its rivalry with the US to Iran, getting huge strategic benefits at a low cost and with zero risk to its own forces. The second pillar is military assistance, and this support is often hard to trace. China has become a key supplier of the technology and components that Iran's military relies on. This includes advanced drones, anti-ship cruise missiles, and even chemical precursors for Iran's solid-fuel rocket program, which helps them build more accurate long-range missiles. Maybe most importantly, China has given Iran access to its Beidou satellite navigation system. This is a complete game changer. It means Iranian missiles and drones can operate without relying on the American-controlled GPS system, making them much harder to jam or disable with electronic warfare. With every piece of tech and every component from Beijing, Iran becomes a more lethal opponent for the US military. It forces the Pentagon to deploy its best air and missile defense systems, like Patriot and THAAD batteries, and keep high-value assets like aircraft carriers on constant alert. It's a slow, steady drain on American military readiness. This leads to the third pillar, intelligence. Every time tensions flare in the Gulf, every time the US Navy maneuvers, and every time an American missile defense system lights up, China is watching. The Middle East has become a live-fire laboratory for the People's Liberation Army. Any potential conflict gives Beijing a priceless opportunity to gather intelligence on US military tactics, command structures, and the real-world performance of its advanced weapons. Military analysts point out that Iran's own doctrine, especially its focus on denying an enemy access to the Strait of Hormuz with missiles and swarms of small ships, is heavily influenced by Chinese strategy. By watching how the US counters this in the Gulf, China gets invaluable insights into how to perfect its own strategy for a potential war over Taiwan. To top it off, China, Russia, and Iran have been running joint naval drills together called the Maritime Security Belt since 2019. They're officially for security cooperation, but their real purpose is to improve military coordination and send a message that a new coalition is ready to challenge Western naval power. These exercises let the Chinese Navy operate in a critical waterway, learn the region, and practice working with a key American adversary. It's a dress rehearsal for a new era of great power competition. This complex web of economic lifelines, military tech, and intelligence sharing shows what China's strategy is all about. It's not a traditional alliance. It's about using Iran as a strategic tool to bog down and weaken its main global competitor. If you're getting value from this breakdown of the hidden forces shaping our world, take a second to hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that deep dives like this are important and helps us keep making them for you. This brings us to the climax, the moment the trap is sprung. And here's the key. The trap doesn't need a single shot fired between the US and China. The trap isn't some future war. The trap is the reality we're in right now. It's the strategic overextension of the United States. The core of America's national security strategy is that China is the single biggest long-term challenge. The main goal is to shift focus and resources to the Indo-Pacific to deter Chinese aggression, especially around Taiwan. But this pivot to Asia has been constantly sabotaged by one crisis after another in the Middle East. Every time the US tries to look east, it gets pulled right back west. This is the genius of China's play. By keeping Iran just strong enough to be a constant problem, Beijing ensures that a huge chunk of America's military, diplomatic, and intelligence assets are stuck in the Middle East. Think about what that really means.
Advanced fighter squadrons, carrier strike groups, and critical missile defense systems that should be positioned for the Pacific are instead deployed to the Gulf. This creates a dangerous security gap in the Pacific. It makes key US allies like Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan nervous, wondering if Washington's security guarantees are stretched too thin. From Beijing's point of view, it's the perfect scenario. A distracted, overstretched America is less able to challenge China's expansion in the South China Sea, counter its economic plans, or effectively intervene if there's a crisis over Taiwan. The constant threat of a war with Iran is the strategic victory for China. The Middle East has become a proxy battleground. China is fighting a war of attrition against American resources and willpower, all while publicly calling for peace. We see this in their diplomacy. After any regional flare-up, Chinese diplomats tour the region, positioning Beijing as the responsible peacemaker and a stable alternative to a disruptive United States. They even brokered the deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran in 2023, a move perfectly designed to show off their growing diplomatic power. It's a strategy of soft integration versus America's hard power. While the US builds military bases, China builds ports and economic partnerships. This contrast helps China sell a story, especially to the global South, that it's a force for development, while the US is a source of conflict. The longer America is bogged down in the Middle East, the more effective that story becomes. The trap isn't a sudden ambush. It's a slow, grinding erosion of American power. So is the tension with Iran dragging America into a war with China? The answer is no, but for a much more alarming reason than you might think. It's not dragging the US into a war with China, because the conflict itself is already a key front in their competition. The real story isn't about a direct military clash. It's about strategic distraction. China has masterfully turned the Middle East into a second front, using Iran as a pawn to drain American resources, test US military strategy, and keep Washington's eyes off the main prize, the Indo-Pacific. Beijing gains an advantage with every dollar Washington spends containing Iran, and with every carrier group diverted to the Gulf. China is playing the long game. It uses economic lifelines and quiet military support to keep its rival tied down, all while publicly calling for peace and acting like a responsible global power. They're fighting a war of attrition without taking any casualties, gaining ground every time America is forced to react to another crisis in a region it's been trying to leave for over a decade. The real danger isn't an accidental clash between US and Chinese ships in the Strait of Hormuz. The real danger is that by the time America finally untangles itself from the Middle East, the balance of power in Asia may have already shifted for good. But that leads to one last critical question. Is China's strategy a work of geopolitical genius, or is its own deep dependence on Middle Eastern energy an Achilles heel that could backfire? Is Beijing really controlling the game, or is it just riding a tiger it can't get off of? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if this video gave you a new perspective on the global power struggle, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive.